Welcome to Fostering Parenthood.
Consent, porn,
normal relationship,
being a teen mom,
my first real adult love,
what it's like to be a foster child.
Every person I had had an attachment with had left.
How trauma impacts your decision making.
I didn't feel very accepted and I didn't feel very safe.
And he said, you are lowering your own value by putting up with this.
And I wish someone was there to be there and tell me that it wasn't okay.
How do I honor providing that space for them?
It's about being in a place to be open to someone sharing with you their hurts.
Making sure that you guys are going into things open and supportive, or just even willing, right, to have these conversations.
I need you to find the strength to call someone and say, I'm drowning right now.
It's helpful to know yourself first as a caregiver.
But I just want caregivers to know that you're not alone.
You called me mom. Hello and welcome to an exciting episode of Fostering Parenthood, the podcast where we delve into the multifaceted world of foster care and parenting. In today's episode, we're diving into an incredibly important topic in today's day and age: navigating social media and other internet technologies, with its special emphasis on fostering digital safety for our foster youth. We're honored to have Jennifer Rodriguez with us today. Jennifer is the Executive Director of the Youth Law Center, an expert on rights to internet and computer technology access for youth in foster care, and someone who has personally lived through the foster care system. Together, we will be exploring strength-based, youth-centered strategies for safer internet usage and ways caregivers can help youth build online literacy. We'll be discussing the legal rights of youth in foster care regarding internet access, the importance of fostering digital education and empowerment, and providing tips and resources to help you through this journey. This episode will center caregiver and youth empowerment by providing tips on having transparent conversations about social media, setting boundaries, and differentiating between healthy and potentially dangerous online engagements. Then, in our second segment, we'll be answering your questions and addressing your concerns about safe social media practices that you've kindly sent in. We'll touch on questions like the pros and cons of delaying social media usage for kids, how to define what constitutes social media, and how to navigate age-appropriate content online. So get ready for this deep dive into the digital world. Whether you're a caregiver, a concerned parent, or simply interested in the topic, we trust you'll find this discussion not only informative, but also empowering. Remember, our goal here is to balance protection from online dangers while always respecting our youth's rights, encouraging their education and autonomy, and equipping them with the skills for an increasingly online world. Wow. We have a lot to cover, girl.
It sounds like it.
Yeah. Thank you, Jennifer, so much for being here. And I know you're very, very busy as executive director, and I just can't share with you how honored I am to have you on this podcast today.
Well, it's really a gift to be here with you. I was remembering when we met at the Hilton convening and just how important you as a foster parent are, and all of the resource parents that are across California. You are really the ones who are holding together our child welfare systems right now. So it's my honor, really.
Thank you so much. You know, I want to start out during our conversation at understanding what the rights are of a youth. I know that as caregivers, we often make rules in our homes and set limitations based on fear. And sometimes that fear really kind of takes over, and we forget that the youth in our home have the right to some autonomy and to be able to use the internet. What are youth rights? Yeah,
so the rights of youth in foster care are the framework under which we establish what young people have access to, what sort of is the minimum or the floor for what they should be provided. And I've thought a lot about this because I grew up myself in foster care, and soon after I exited my very last placement, I had the opportunity to get involved with the California Youth Connection. And the first piece of legislation that I worked on as a teenager was the Foster Care Bill of Rights. We were the first state in the U.S. to have a Foster Care Bill of Rights. And we worked on that with the support of the Youth Law Center. So it's full circle because now I'm all grown up and I'm a lawyer and I'm the executive director of the Youth Law Center. But at the time when we were designing the Foster Care Bill of Rights, really the idea was that in foster care, so frequently there is nobody who loves us, who's dreaming of a future for us, who's thinking of our best interests and the activities we should be doing, the people we should be seeing, the way we should be treated, in the way that children who live with their natural families, that we hope that they're held and protected. And so we needed a statutory framework to really establish those things, which for children who are growing up with, a family who has known them and who loves them and who's committed to them, they may not need that. And so, that Bill of Rights is really important. And that is actually where the right to participate in extracurricular activities and enrichment activities, where the right to have contact with siblings, with family members, with friends, with important connections, where the right to have access to the phone, to technology, to social media, where they all reside. So the Bill of Rights, actually, people talk about it as if it is a thing. What we did way back when, and this was 1999, so a really long time ago, was we took all the sections of the statute and the regulations that already existed and we codified them in one place. So it didn't actually establish new rights. So this right for young people to have access to social and extracurricular and enrichment activities and contact actually live in the Welfare and Institutions Code. They live in the Resource Family Directives that are implemented by the California Department of Social Services. They live in our licensing standards, for homes. They live in our administrative regulations. So they're kind of all over the place in terms of where they are, but they are clear. And they clearly give young people the right to have a cell phone, to have access to internet access and technology, to be using social media for, particular purposes. So they're very clearly laid out in those sections. And here's what I will say is when you introduced me as an expert on internet and technology, and I'd love to add that to my resume, but it's not true. I'm not an expert on that, but I am, because there's not a lot to say actually in our, I'm a lawyer, and there's not a lot to say in our statute or our regulations about this area particularly, other than that young people can have access.
Okay. Well, you know what? Thank you for kind of defining that, because I've often, as a caregiver myself, looked at those Youth Bill of Rights and said, well, are these made up? Are they somewhere that they're actually a bill somewhere? Exactly how much power is behind this? Not that I want to go against them, but I just kind of wondered where they came from. So it's really offers that clarity that we've pulled each one of those rights from documents that stand clear. One of the things that I don't know, I'm just going to kind of be transparent, okay? I'm a mom, I'm a caregiver, I have 19 million children. I love them all, whether they birthed out of me or whether they came through my front door carrying, unfortunately, trash bags, right? I love them all. But the children who especially have come into my home from experiences from the street, from group homes, from areas that they've learned skill sets or don't really have the discernment to monitor safety online. I myself have had a real challenge looking at the Bill of Rights, knowing that this kiddo has absolutely every right to have access to the phone, to have access to the computer, to be able to go on social media for all of the positive reasons. And I'm sure we'll get into those because we want this to be strength-based. We want kids to have friends and, build self-esteem and all of those things. But I got to be just frank and say my fear is I've seen kiddos come in and right away I glance over their shoulder and they're selling themselves for 10 minutes for $10 and they're 12 years old. And it's really hard to watch them put themselves at risk and yet not want to take away their right.
There's a lot to unpack there, and
there is, and I'm sorry I jumped down that one, but I know there isn't a soul that's coming on here that's not saying, "Come on, just get to it. How do I balance this?"
Okay, so let me get everything that I think is less important, actually, or it's not less important. Let me get everything that's less helpful out of the way.
Okay.
Because in all honesty, the rights of young people to have access, and then there's a corresponding duty and responsibility of resource families to use the reasonable and prudent parent standard. And I'll talk a little bit about what that is, but I will tell you, they feel like they're conflicting to most caregivers. They feel like here's a right to, be on social media, to be using technology, and then I have the duty and responsibility to be a reasonable and prudent parent to this child and make sure that they are only doing developmentally appropriate, age appropriate activities. Those don't go together. I don't see how they match. And actually that's the bulk of what I'm going to talk with you about today, that neither one of those are actually all that helpful in the real life practical working out of what it means for each individual child and their caregiver to navigate online access and social media. It's a tricky area, but I want to get it all out of the way.
Let's do it. Let's unpack.
Let's say everything we need to say and sort of get it up front. I think that's really helpful. So for caregivers, you are all applying the reasonable and prudent parent standard, and the things that you're considering in that reasonable and prudent parent standard are the age, the maturity, the developmental level of the child or youth that's in your home, the nature of whatever that activity is, and the inherent risk of any kind of harm, and the youth's best interest based on whatever you know about that child, which may be a lot and it may be close to nothing, right? And you're also, of course, always considering whatever the court or the placing agency has ordered. So in some limited cases, a child may be coming into your home where there is a court order that actually prohibits cell phone use or prohibits social media use or may limit the child having contact with particular people and require the resource parent to be doing more monitoring or overseeing. Those are really unusual situations, though.
Sure.
So, in that framework, our policy directives have set some questions that resource parents can ask themselves to help guide a decision that this theoretical, reasonable, or prudent parent would make. So asking, does the activity seem reasonable? Is the activity age or developmentally appropriate for the child? Is the activity appropriate given the child's maturity? Because age doesn't always match developmental maturity, right?
No, it does not.
Yeah. Is the activity consistent with health, safety, best interest of the child? Does the activity encourage emotional, developmental, or cultural growth of the child? Does the activity assist in normalizing life in foster care and giving that young person the opportunity to have the same kind of experiences as their peers who are not in foster care are having? And then what are the inherent risk, hazards, or harms related to the activity? And, I actually think that last question is probably the most confusing in all of this, because I honestly think we're still figuring it out as a society,
I
what
agree.
the risk, hazards, and harms actually are for children and youth, and having, sort of unfettered online access and listening to the news or to sort of popular discussion is entirely unhelpful in trying to figure that out, because you'll hear everything. You'll hear everything from, if you give your child access, they're going to become addicted, to technology, to, there's a predator lurking around every corner online, to actually young people who are, gaming on their cell phones or using social media are going to be better equipped for the workforce that's coming in the future, because our teens now, our children, are likely to not even have a human for a first boss. They're likely to have an algorithm who's their first. So they have to actually have digital literacy. And it's hard. Even, I believe mamas are magic. And so all the mamas and the dads, mamas in quotes, who are listening to this, and grandparents, you all are magic. And if anybody can figure this all out, you can. But even for our magic mamas, I feel like it's a lot to try to swim through. And so part of the reason I feel like the law as a framework is not that helpful is that, one, it says two kind of opposing things that people can't figure out how they coincide. And honestly, I'm not sure our policymakers have figured that out either for children and youth in foster care. But also, the folks who know most about this right now are developmental folks. They are our adolescent pediatricians. They are people who are studying the use of media with children. They're people who are giving the tips. And their voices are typically the quietest in all of this discussion. And so I'm coming to channel some, but I want to be perfectly honest that, like, I'm a conduit today for what I think is most helpful for everyone listening are really two things. One is to know, to be, I'll say a third. A third is it's important to know the law, but I suspect that probably everyone who's tuning into this does know the law and is confused by that, and that might be why you're listening today, because you can't figure out if the law gave firm and clear direction as to how to make these decisions, then we wouldn't need to do a podcast about it. People would just do what they needed to do. But I'm a lawyer, so I'll say, like, that's thing number one. But here are the two things that I feel are really important that I'm a conduit for. One is what the developmental researchers are finding, suggesting, the framework that they're putting around how to think about technology and children and youth, and what a parent's role is. And there's actually nothing that is all that different for resource parents to know about this related to a child who's in foster care, other than the fact that you are co-parenting with all kinds of folks in the system, which is really challenging because everyone has to be on the same page about this.
Yes.
So that's thing number one. The other voices that I will be a conduit for in this conversation are the voices of young people themselves. Because this is it is such a sensitive topic. And you mentioned the training for resource families when they first come in. And, I think out of sort of the system's default liability position, like, oftentimes the information that resource parents get about technology, online activities is full of caution, right? It's full of, this might happen. You have to worry about this. There's trafficking, there's cyberbullying, there's all of these, there's contact with people that, the child shouldn't be having unsupervised contact with. You're told all of the reasons to be wary of it. For children and youth, they have a whole nother set of considerations too that have to do with oftentimes their phone or the internet being the only place they have autonomy in their life. It may be the only connection that they feel that they have to the life before foster care or the people who are outside of that home. It may be their way of feeling like they can care for, parent, protect siblings that they're not in the same home with, that they can maintain some kind of normal social life. through a lot of transitions. It may be the only place that they feel like they really can get the information that they need to get to be able to find out about things like post-secondary education or reproductive health care, or, even simple things like how do I get on the bus from home to school. And so they have a whole nother set of sort of attachments to being online. And so whether that's a phone or their tablet or their iPad or whatever, it represents things that oftentimes resource parents have not heard about in their training. And I will say that I remember vividly, this was pre-pandemic. I went out to do a listening session with a group of young people, and I won't say the county because the county is not important. I probably could have done this same listening session and heard the same feedback in any county or any state for that matter in the US. And the youth were talking about how these were all young people who were having lots of disruptions in their living situation. So lots of placements with families that didn't work out and, oftentimes disrupted. And so I thought I was going in to hear a lot about the kind of behavioral health supports that young people might really want, or, better placement matching. But I spent almost 2 hours hearing from young people about the reason they were disrupting was actually conflict over access to their cell phone, access to technology. And what I realized in hearing, I asked for a lot of details. Tell me what happened, who helped, what was the initial conversation like? What were subsequent conversations like? What I realized was that there was no discussions happening about why. So the resource parents were not explaining to the young people what they were concerned about. They were laying down a law. This is what we do in this home. And this is what we're doing to keep you safe, period. And the young person wasn't explaining or wasn't getting the chance to explain what it represented to them and what they felt like was being limited, which was much, much more than a device. So for them, they felt like their relationships were being cut off. Their sort of escape route, if things were not safe, were getting cut off. Their social lives were getting cut off. All of these things that were so important. And my big question was who is helping to facilitate these conversations and not helping to facilitate the conversations once things have gone bad, but right from the front? Because, one of the favorite things for me, and I'll tell you all, I come at this from a bunch of different angles, and maybe that's important to explain too, is that growing up in the system, I was a kid like the one you described when you asked me this question so many minutes ago. I came into foster care after a couple of years of living on the streets. So I was 12 when I came in, and I had already been taking care of myself. For a couple of years, I had been living on the street. I had been, trafficked and involved in all kinds of stuff that were survival things. And so I felt very grown when I finally came into the system. I felt like I'm able to take care of myself. I'm able to provide for my needs. I don't need anybody to, parent me or tell me what to do. And I ended up being an institution kid. They moved me from group home to group home. I was never in a family the entire time that I was in the system, and, ended up spending time in juvenile hall and psych hospitals through my journey, but never got to be in a family, and was, I would say, up and down while I was in care. I didn't want a family. And what I was actually saying was I didn't want the vulnerability of, being told I was too broken for anybody to love me. But it translated, and I will say that I'm older, so I didn't have this conflict then, but I had this same need met through reading. I read everything so that I didn't have to rely on people giving me bad information. I went and researched it myself. Once I had full access to the internet, it was the best thing that ever happened to me and I'm still like this. The minute, I have to go to the doctor, I don't trust the doctor. I'll go and I'll online everything, research everything myself and go in and say, here's the list of symptoms I have. Here's the condition I have. Here's the treatment I think I need. You can second guess me. And I will
just
tell
sign
you,
here.
Yeah, just sign here. I mean, honestly, like 90% of the time I'm right. So,
Those are good odds.
So I'm still that person now. I'm just better at doing what I do. But so that's one angle that I come from. The other angle that I come from is obviously I'm a lawyer and an advocate. My work at the Youth Law Center is all about trying to make sure that we have a child welfare and a juvenile justice system that's responsive to young people's needs. Our signature way of doing advocacy is actually to be listening to young people, to be listening to developmental scientists, and then to be trying to line up policy with what both of them say they want. And part of our work at the Youth Law Center is this child welfare system change initiative called the Quality Parenting Initiative. And our focus on that is to say, our resource parents and parenting are the most important intervention the child welfare system can offer. So everything in the system should be about supporting resource parents, working with them as equal and valued partners, making sure that, they are actually leading the way. Because without our families, we have no system. Like we basically have orphanages, which is not a good place for any child to grow up. But then the third perspective that I come to this with is I'm a mama of teenagers. So I have a high school senior and a high school sophomore. And so these are not philosophical topics for me. They're actually I have to navigate them in my own house and my own life. And I'm familiar with like the pitfalls and the risk. And I think that's actually really important because this is part of the reason I feel like the law is unhelpful. It's got some philosophies in it, but practically when the rubber hits the road, when you're dealing with a child in front of you, it's really an individual calculation around any of those questions that I asked about the reasonable and prudent parent. And the advantage that I have with my children is I've known them since they were babies. And so I have an idea of exactly what their proclivities are, exactly what their developmental level is, exactly what is going to be sort of, what do they call it? In the legal field, they call it a dangerous nuisance, right? Something that looks tempting right now and is going to get them in trouble down the road. And what are the things that are actually going to be really important based on what they want to do, down the line. So, there's going to be, based on who your child is, these things fall out in different ways. And that's part of the reason that I feel so strongly that we really have to attend to what the research says and what we're learning about how to safely use this, while acknowledging the ship has left the dock, right? Or the train has left the station. We live in a digital world now, and our world is only getting more digital. And so for me, if I was raising my children when I grew up, like I had older kids who taught me how to navigate the street, right? Like that was the first thing. They taught me how to spot somebody who might jump me or might rob me, or, who to not make eye contact with, who to make eye contact with, which blocks to avoid. Those were all parts of like my survival skills as a kid who was out on the streets way too much. Now we have the same responsibility as people who love our children to treat the internet like a block. Like you're teaching your children how to navigate, not just during their childhood, but the whole rest of their life. They need to know, like, this is a scam. This might be somebody scamming you, or this is when you don't want to provide personal information in this context because, you may be making yourself unsafe, or these are the kind of places to avoid, or this is what you need to do to make sure that you're actually dealing with somebody, and you're not dealing with, if you think you're talking to a 13-year-old girl, to make sure that's really not a 50-year-old man, right? Like those are their survival skills.
And I just want to say that I love the 3 points that you made because those are all so valid, right? Each one brings a different perspective. And many of our caregivers have that different perspective, right? Many of them are on social media, but yet our society has put such fear into all of us that if you allow kiddos to go onto social media, they're going to be the victim of a predator. And so many of us kind of approach this in a way where we feel like we're saving them. But what we're not doing through that fear is we're not creating a system where, as you said so well, this is as if they were on the street looking for predators. We need to see social media as an entirely different environment, but one that is as dangerous or as beneficial as things in society. So how do we create that literacy, right? Not just to know what apps and how to be safe and how to gain all of the benefits of social media. I think based on QPI, based on my personal beliefs, we have to build that relationship with these kiddos. We didn't birth them. They may have entered our home yesterday, last year, 5 years ago, but we have the ultimate responsibility to prepare our children for independence. We can't do that by taking away a privilege with no reason. That's right. You know, it's like throwing them a life ring when they're drowning and walking away. You know, we're not following through with, this is why you were going to drown, right? You don't know how to swim. Let's help you learn the basic skills before we go in the deep water. I'm not telling you you can't swim. I'm telling you, let's do it together. Let's learn the skills together so that you can then feel that independence and enjoy the water.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And I think you're 100% right on. Part of the reason I was thinking, well, you introduced me as a technology expert, not really a technology expert, but I still think I have something to share with you, because actually this conversation is actually not about technology. This is about, it's about boundaries and rules in a household, and how you get through what children and youth hear when you set rules and boundaries, and how you navigate those, which is 100% relationships.
Absolutely.
And so this is not any different than talking about curfew or talking about dating or talking about, respecting other family members who are in the house. It's the same thing. And it's, even explaining, you talked about having a child enter your home who essentially hadn't been parented before. And that was me too. And so I was not used to, either in the home that I was removed from or while I was on the street, I was not used to having anyone set rules or boundaries, and now as a parent, I think about the whole point of having rules or boundaries and parameters is one, because your number one job as a parent is to keep your child safe, right? That's one. But it's also about preparing the child that you're raising to understand that the world has rules. And you want them to succeed, like to learn how to live within the rules so they can be successful, to learn how to challenge the rules that don't make sense in a way that's actually effective and productive. So that's the reason as parents we set these kind of rules and boundaries. But in order for a child to believe that a rule or a boundary that you're setting for them is for those two purposes, they have to trust you. And for a child or youth who hasn't been parented, who has had multiple reasons to believe that adults can't be trusted, that's the hurdle that you have to jump over. And the truth is that any limitation that you set that interferes with, I'll go to teens right now, because that's typically who we're talking about. I think we're talking about tweens and teens in this discussion, although increasingly elementary school children as well. But for tweens and teens, their developmental work is actually to listen less to their families and to listen more to their peers and to spend more time with their peers and to be more independent, to be more autonomous, to be their own person. That's literally what their brains are wired to do.
It's their job.
It's their job. It's their job. If that's what they're doing, you're doing a great job, parents.
Yes.
But that necessarily means when you set boundaries on their autonomy, their independence, their risk taking, all of those things, there's going to be some pushback and some conflict that arises. All of that is healthy if it can be couched within a strong relationship. And actually, youth themselves say they want that. They want to actually have somebody who they feel like is teaching them how to live in the world, who cares enough, right, to be setting some of those boundaries and those expectations. But it gets real rocky when, this is somebody you just met. Maybe you have had zero positive experiences with any adult actually exercising, any kind of boundaries or rules in a way that is in that young person's best interest, and they know it. Then it just feels like you're trying to control me. You're trying to control me. You're trying to limit me. And then you basically can't work on anything else. And that's what I think I was hearing from those young people. What I was hearing from them is like, this is a non-starter. It was the first thing that came up. Oh, in this house, you will plug your cell phone in the kitchen at nighttime. And period. That's what we do. That's the rule here. And they were like, no. Like, what happens if somebody comes in my room in the middle of the night? What happens if my sister, who's in a different home, calls me in the middle of the night and is crying because she's sad and she misses me? We were just split up. Like, what if I decide I want to leave? I'm done with this place in the middle of the night. I need to be able to call it Uber. All of those things were for that young person. So they couldn't even get to the relationship. They had no idea whether this could have been like, the home where they were really going to thrive and have a great relationship, because it felt like control. And so I think it's really important for resource families to understand how youth are hearing those things, and also to acknowledge that it isn't actually a matter of should young people be on social media or navigating technology or not, because they are going to be. And you can set the rule. They will break it. They will use it outside of your house. It will become a game, for them to break any rule or restriction that you put down there. If there are any families who are listening right now who are not familiar with the term burner phone, just go Google it. You could take that young person's phone away. They will get another one for $20 and get on your internet and get on whatever boundary or rule that you put in place. They can one up you. Like there is no question about that. And so that's just not an effective approach for any of this. What again, it's just back to what you said, Dorothy. You're so wise. I mean, the only way through this is through using this conversation as an opportunity to build the relationship. And let me just say right now that I think it's unfair that is the foster parents, the resource parents' job alone. I think this should absolutely be a responsibility of the system, to make sure that the social worker is facilitating that conversation, is helping to, frame it in a way that is not an argument, but actually an opportunity to talk about what's the culture around online usage going to be in this home. Let's negotiate. The number one thing from the developmental side for children who have had traumatic experiences, the most healing thing that we can do is give them power and control wherever we can. So this is an opportunity to give young people some power and control to say, like, what's most important to you? What do you want to be able to do online? What do you think is reasonable? Like, here's what I'm trying to achieve for you. Like, here are the concerns that I have. So if you were me, what were the rules? What can we agree upon together? Because we're going to be a team. You and I, we're going to be a team in this. Like, I'm on your team. I'm cheering you on. I want you to be successful. But I know that part of my job and the way that I'm going to do that is going to be to set some rules, just like a sports team has, just like a debate team has. We're going to have some rules. So let's make them together. Like, I want you to feel that that's just an effective process with teens, period. Agreed. But it's like, in this particular case, it's an opportunity to build the relationship too.
But I will say, from the caregiver's perspective, and I know that there's many of you listening that are saying, well, you don't know. because you haven't lived it. And I've had children that XYZ.
Yep.
Guys, I promise you, I am a parent of 6 children. I am a caregiver of 6 children. I am the adoptive parent. I am a guardian. And I actually watched a 15-year-old walk out the front door, flipping me off and screaming at me because there was a technology issue. Now, I have learned it's that argument, you'll never win.
Mm-mm.
This is not about control.
That's right.
This is about relationships. And when you have a child walking in your home, I'm just going to encourage you. Instead of a child you've never met before, and you're so willing with your open heart to take this child into your home, and instead of the first thing you say, put your phone down or go plug it in the other room. We don't allow phones here during these hours or whatever. How about if you start with, welcome to my home. This is your home too. We're together. We're going to do this together. And I don't know where you've been and you don't know where I've been, but we're together now. And we're going to celebrate that. And look at the phone and say, what kind of phone do you have, man? I've got this old phone. You've got the what? You've got the 13 or 14 or Pro or Max or whatever. Bond over that technology. Find a way, say, hey man, what is the latest app? Because like I'm still on Facebook. So like I am centuries old. Can you help me?
That's right.
And start to build this common ground that you can learn from each other. And say, hey man, I heard that Roblox, there's predators on there. Have you ever played Roblox? I heard there's 750,000 predators at any given time. Man, what does a predator look like? Have you ever? Because I don't know. And I'm on Facebook and I don't want to go on TikTok because I'm afraid of a predator. Can you help me with that? Don't control our children. Teach our children. And part of what I want to ask you, Jennifer, is, there is some positive things about social media. There's some beautiful things. And I never thought it during this podcast or anything else you'd ever hear me say that, because I know what all those signs and everything that they use when they're texting and all that. But honestly, the more research I do, even our Surgeon General doesn't know a lot about the damages or the gains of social media. We're not alone on this podcast. There isn't a lot of research that tells us that it's harmful at 13, 16, 18. We don't know. There's not enough research. Have you heard anything about that? Because I know that as we go into our next section, I just want to stop real quick. We were really fortunate that we were able to have caregivers share their questions for Jennifer. And although you say you're not an expert in technology, you know a whole lot more than I do. So between the two of us, you're the expert. And one of their questions was, well, what age? I mean, what are the pros and the cons in having our children delay their access to social media? So in other words, we're not saying you're never going to go on social media. Even when you're 45, you're not going to go on. No, we're not saying that. We're saying let's try to delay it. And as you said so appropriately, that we don't develop always at the same rate, right? So what your high schooler, your sophomore might be ready for, my sophomore in my house may not be ready for, based on the trauma and based on their developmental stage. So how do we do that? I mean, what is the advantage of delaying?
Well, I mean, I think that you're spot on that this is really, it's an individual calculation that you have to make. And it's part of the reason I'm grateful that there's no guidance saying like at the age of 12 or 14, like here are the platforms, because that's really meaningless. And it's particularly meaningless. It's meaningless in the general population of children, but it's particularly meaningless with our young people, because they've experienced trauma. Their development may look very different from other children. So in order to make that calculation, you actually have to know more about the platforms and what they want to do. And so my advice would be that if you have a child in your home that came to you and said, like, for example, I want to get on TikTok. Everyone's on TikTok. That what you do is you say, I want to learn more about TikTok. Let's sit down and look at TikTok together. Like, tell me why. What sounds exciting to you or fun about TikTok? And then you might find out like, oh, because I really want to learn to do makeup, and I heard there's all these makeup tutorials on there. Or because, I just found out that my family is from Jalisco, Mexico. And, I want to, I saw my other friend looking at all these great travel videos. And then tell them, show me. Like, let's, I don't know anything about TikTok. Let's go on TikTok. Let's go see together. So you start getting an idea of how your child is thinking about and the why. And then you have more information to be able to make a decision for that young person. And then it's an activity that you started together and you can continue to some degree to do together. Meaning, I don't mean that every time that they're on TikTok that you go over and you say, show me how to do that dance. That's not what I'm suggesting.
Oh, you mean that caregivers don't have anything else to do?
Yeah, right. Or that you want to be learning all the TikTok dances? No, but every once in a while, every few days, if you see your child like on the phone and, glued into it, go by and say like, hey, whatever you're looking at looks interesting. Like, show me. Like, what have you been looking at that's cool? And you know, I need to get with the times, so show me. So that it becomes something that where you're kind of monitoring, but you're monitoring in a way that does not feel oppressive and doesn't feel controlling. Mm-hmm. You're engaging with them. And then you are expanding your knowledge about what they're accessing and what these platforms actually are, which I think is really important, because sometimes what we're hearing is, if you just listen to the news, you hear like TikTok is being banned in all of these places. It sounds so dangerous. And then, you see what kids are actually doing on TikTok, all these challenges, that are silly. And you think, well, okay, both things can be true at the same time, but clearly there are different stories about what people are doing on here. So I think that is really, one important sort of strategy to figure out what's right for your child and what they're ready for. I would say, and this is a personal opinion, is that you wait for your child to want something before you introduce it. And you also help your child think about what they are not doing when they are doing that. So they need to be aware. And I think that's all in the back of resource parents' heads. Like, you're going to sit on that phone all day and you're not going to get any sunshine, or you're not going to get your homework done, or you're not going to be doing the chores around the house. And so that's important to talk about, to say like, okay, so what are the things that you think you'll be missing? And what's a reasonable amount of time, and how do you think you can manage that time? And I'll say this is, it's important for kids to learn how to do this, because a whole lot of us adults who use social media and go online on our phone, we have no skills in this area at all, because we didn't start with it. So we don't, right. I mean, personally, I often on the weekend will find out, like, I went on to look at one thing and now suddenly it's 2.5 hours later and I never intended. And so, starting our kids, like, would it be helpful to have a timer? Would you like a reminder? Like, what's the right amount of time, and what will you be missing? Not like, I don't want you to be on any longer than that. It's moving and showing the boundary does not come from a place of trying to control you. It comes from a place of caring, and trying to help them. And that's important to reinforce in every single discussion that you have about this. So I think it's difficult to know. There's not a simple, straightforward answer as to like what age is the right age. I mean, again, I will go back to there is a resource called, let's see, it is the Digital Wellness Lab out of Boston's Children's Hospital. It's run by a Harvard adolescent pediatrician. And they have all kinds of incredible resources for families generally, including like a whole document that lays out for each age group, starting with 0 to 18 months, because those children have screen time. They're online too. Some families may have experienced doing online visitation during COVID. You often see little ones with tablets who are playing games on there. So for every age group, they lay out what are the considerations, what should families be thinking about, how to have the conversations with your child. We'll put that so everyone has access to that resource after. But one of the things that the pediatrician who runs that center, who actually calls himself, this is so corny and clever at the same time, he calls himself a mediatrician. Do you like that?
Stop it.
Yes,
Dr. Mediatrician.
Dr. Mediatrician. Yes, I love
That's
it.
awesome. I
I'm
like
so
it.
cheesy. But one of the things
Do you think he's an expert? Because you know what? He sounds
he's
like
who
he
you
might
need.
be an
Yes.
expert.
He's who you need, but luckily he has a whole center with all kinds of written resources. So everyone will have access to those things. But one of the things that he said that I think is so important is like, it is actually impossible to have a social media or an online addiction. People talk about that, but like you can have a drug or an alcohol addiction because it's something that you wouldn't otherwise consume, right? Like, but in this case, it would be like saying you have a car addiction. Like we all have to use cars. So this is much, if children and youth are spending too much time doing that, it's much more like a binge eating disorder because you're taking in something that actually is good for you and it's helpful in the long way, but you're taking in too much of it. And you treat it kind of in the same way around trying to make sure that child or youth has balance.
Keyword, right?
Balance.
And it's so important. And you know, and I would again challenge all of us. How much time do we spend on social media? I know there isn't like, well, I don't really always just do social media, but I'm on my computer. I mean, I'll be watching television with the family, but I very rarely don't have my phone or my computer in my lap, and I multitask. I call it multitasking, but my kids, they don't know I'm not on social media.
Exactly.
Or I am on social media. I happen to not, but they don't know it. They see mom doing exactly what they want to do. Another thing that I think is really helpful as a caregiver, and maybe you've run into this too, Jennifer, is what are their alternatives? So in other words, if we say, well, you've been on that too long, stop, get off. What else is there? What have you set in your home as being preferable activities? If the only preferable activity is social media or cleaning their room, which one would you do? I'm sorry. Social media, thank you so much. What do we have as options? So this week I'm doing this test. It was kind of based on this podcast too, but I took my kids' social media and I said, guys, let's play a game. I can't go on, you can't go on. Let's see what kind of things we can come up with to have fun. Well, guess what I found? Mom, do you want to play a game? Mom, what are you doing? Do you want to build Legos? And I'm like, oh God, I don't, because I want to get back on my computer and my phone too. But as a family, this is our project. We're doing it together. And what I'm hoping at the end of this trial period, that we will find balance.
Yes.
Because we were getting off balance. We were all starting to kind of go to our places of comfort. And that was it, right? That was family time. Everybody on screens. Now, family time doesn't look like that.
That's right. And it's so important, I think, for you're raising that, like, whatever our rule is, we have to reinforce that and model that in our own behavior for ourselves. And we have to be really honest when we don't have balance and sort of talk out loud so that that young people can hear, like, oh, we're working on this too.
I even pulled coloring books out, and I mean, they were adult coloring books, okay? Like, I didn't like draw Snoopy or whatever. I guess kids don't even know what Snoopy is anymore. But we're doing things that we haven't done in a very long time.
And that's the perfect moment, Dorothy, to point out, like, man, I just realized we're missing time interacting together when we're sitting on our phone. So, like, I love this. I love spending time with you. Maybe we should just carve out, like, something to say that out loud so it starts them. I mean, I need to be reminded of what I am missing out on when I'm, on my phone or sitting on social media. I might be missing out on having a real phone call, like with somebody in real life while I'm sending them messages on a platform. So I think that's really important guidance.
Yeah. And I think that it and maybe that do-over, and I'm not saying people have to do this. I know it's extreme, but I wanted to try it. And what I'm going to do when I reestablish that we're all back on is I'm going to do something like cool, like, hey guys, let's pick a museum that we're all going to go see together. Yes. And everybody has to go on and do research and give their case on why theirs is the best option. And so they're using the computer technology to research so that we can then come together as a family and start talking about it. And what I'm hoping it will do is kind of lead us into, look, this is cool. I didn't know that. And kind of build that positivity around it, and then open up the world back to technology before summer. And I did this intentionally before summer because I wanted to make sure that we just didn't stop school and start 10, 12 hours of technology every day. Does that make sense?
Yeah, you're teaching them how to navigate the digital streets and to get into the right neighborhoods. Like, I love it. I think that's brilliant.
That's awesome.
It's brilliant.
See? Yeah, no, I love that. Okay, let's see if there's any more questions. What do you consider social media? So in other words, which platforms, which apps? And the caregiver has said, I have my thoughts about what exactly social media is, but wouldn't this be a great discussion? I say this because a few of my younger parents don't think TikTok and Instagram are social media. So what's social media?
Well, I think it is what you define it as being. Like, it is an individual thing. I mean, typically it would be media that you're using for some sort of social purposes. Some people use it in more or less social ways than other people do. So, the idea is that they're platforms that let you interact with other folks. But there are folks who don't use social media in a way that really interacts with other people. They may use it more like a magazine to browse or to do research or to look things up. So I think, for the purposes of this discussion, it's really important to find out, again, like, a young person that comes to you and wants to be on generally, to ask them specifically, what do you want to be on? And honestly, things are changing so rapidly that there are platforms that are popping up that didn't exist last week. So to say, what's the platform? Let's look at it together. What do you want to use it for? Like, to find out their why, which might be as simple as, like, my friend is on there and I want to stay connected to my friend. Or it could just be like, I'm just curious. I just want to find out more about it. So it's less important, I think, to define it as to figure out what the young person who's requesting permission or who's informing you that they're on it, what they find valuable about it.
Absolutely. And then I think this last question that I have, we've pretty much answered, but it's how to set boundaries with certain age-appropriate materials online. And I think you've said it so well that basically there is no age-appropriate, it's developmental appropriate. And that's why it's so important that we observe our children, we have a relationship with them so we understand where they are developmentally. Am I right on that?
It's 1,000% right. And I mean, even this is, I hate to be going to the end of the questions and like opening up something sticky, but you can watch any old movie, go look at The Sandlot, and you'll see little boys looking at nudie magazines, right? Like that.
Exactly.
So,
Yeah.
I mean, now, unfortunately, little boys have those same urges, but there's so much more in terms of like pornography that they can get exposed to online. It's not developmentally inappropriate to be curious about those things. It is an overwhelming amount of material and types of material for children to be navigating alone. And so as uncomfortable as, for example, it might feel to a resource parent to have a conversation about pornography online and about, what is healthy, the urge to look at it and even looking at it is a healthy activity, and what the worries are about it. Like, how women may be objectified, the violence that's there, the way that it can become, give inaccurate depictions around sex and around sensuality and pleasure, all of those things. Those are really important discussions to have, because that material is going to come up, one way or another. I remember that as soon as my poor little niece, she got a cell phone, and I think she was maybe 10 at the time. She got a text, like it was like some, phishing text that that had, just imagery that she was horrified by. And she was like, why did they pick me? But,
I'd probably be horrified.
Well, I was too, but it was a great opportunity to say like, oh man, I don't know why you got that. That was clearly a mistake. Here's what I don't like about what you got, and here's what I wish they showed instead. Like so it was just a chance to give, sort of non-value ridden, non-judgmental information that reinforces what I wanted her to know, which is that bodies are beautiful and healthy and should be celebrated and should be shared with somebody who's worthy of them sharing, and that you don't ever have to be subjected to somebody sharing what was not asked for, and that you don't ever want to share. And it gave me a chance to drop in a line around, there are real consequences to doing this, to either getting the information or receiving the information when you're a kid. You want to know something that's really crazy? That like if you're a kid and you send a picture like to somebody else, or you get a picture from somebody else who's a kid, that might actually be, a crime. So you don't ever want to do that. Like you don't ever want to do that. And here's what you should do if you ever get something like that, or if somebody asks you to send something like that. So it was a learning opportunity, a learning moment to share some information that again is going to help her navigate the digital environment.
I think as caregivers and as parents, we care so much, and we're so afraid of what we don't know. But by being so afraid, we tend sometimes to overreact. We tend to set the law, squeeze the boundaries. Children interpret that oftentimes as control. Yeah. You don't care about me. You're not really listening to me. You're just telling me what to do. And I'm going to read something that actually someone shared with me from Facebook. And I want you to think about what it would be like to be this seventh grader today. Seventh grade is what, about 13, somewhere around there. If I were a 13-year-old and something happened, and after I read this story, and you didn't have a relationship with that 13-year-old, and they had no one to go to, isn't that far more dangerous?
That's right.
Than anything that they could even see on social media. The danger isn't the social media. The danger is not having a safe person that I trust, that I can go to. So I want you all to imagine something embarrassing happening to you at school when you were in the 7th grade. So you're in 7th grade and something just horrible happened. Everyone laughed and it was awful, and you were mortified. Then a few weeks passed and everyone found new things to laugh about, and they all moved on. You didn't forget how embarrassed you were, but you could move on. Now, imagine you did something embarrassing in 7th grade and everyone laughed and it was awful. But someone also caught it on Snapchat and turned it into a meme and a TikTok, and everyone in school saw it and took a screenshot of it and spread it further. And you couldn't get away from it, and no one forgot. And you couldn't either. And people were still sharing it months later. I'm 13. I'm mortified, and no one will let me forget it. Be that special person in their life. Don't live in fear. Educate yourself. Talk to your children. Jennifer, you have brought just the most amazing perspectives from not only being the executive director, not only being that miracle mama, but being a foster youth yourself with lived experience. And I want to thank you so much for joining me today on this podcast.
Well, I want to thank you for having me. And, the example that you gave, I think, is so important because it also is a really important responsibility that we all have to talk with our children about the consequences too. It's an entirely different world for a 13-year-old that something can be permanently recorded and available online to everyone when they're 40. For so many 13 is a hard age period, but for so many of our youth, it is really a crisis period. Our hope is they have a whole different life and they don't have to have anything from 13 following them if they don't want to. And I want to just leave you all with, at the beginning of COVID, we could see that there were so many families who were really struggling with these questions around, internet access and the conflicts. And we brought together young people in QPI to come up with tips for resource families on navigating technology and social media in partnership with the teens in their home. And I'm going to make sure this is posted with the podcast, but I just want to leave you all with a couple of those tips because I think this is really powerful. And we just created a space for the young people said, here's what resource families are struggling with. What do you want them to know? What do you want them to understand? And I think that any resource parent could replicate that process in their own home with a young person that's there so that they have the opportunity to share. And so here are a couple of things that youth really wanted families to know. And these are all young leaders from the California Youth Connection. The world that requires technology to create connections and to have access to everything has already been created. It's the world youth need to learn how to live in and to be safe in. It's not bad, it's just different, even though families may need time to understand it. Right now is a time for foster parents to bond with youth and to take time to explain their fears and the reasons behind rules and restrictions so that youth can understand their perspectives and can hear that restrictions come from a place of caring and not controlling. Families should take a solution-based approach to any concerns about safe use of internet and online dangers. This is an important opportunity to teach youth how to say no and how to be empowered to make healthy choices. Teach youth about how to avoid online dangers such as scamming, online predators, pedophiles. Teach youth how to use apps safely, including disabling location sharing settings, not giving out personal or financial information to strangers. Families should help youth be aware of dangers like trafficking and to be alert for signs of danger. Families should help teach youth about the potential severity and consequences of reckless actions they take on the internet so that they can make good decisions. And so I think we're ending at the same place where we started, which is what young people are saying is this is an opportunity for us to build a relationship and connection. This is an opportunity for resource families. Even if you don't know that much about it, this is your opportunity to teach or learn together with the young person in your home, really how to help them be digitally fluent in their life and to find all the good and wonderful things like the research that you're going to do on the museums together.
So I can be bilingual. I can be digitally fluent.
You can.
What?
I think so.
What? All right. I'm on that.
You
Jennifer,
too
this has
can
been
aspire
so
to
fun.
be a mediatrician.
Yes. Mediatrician. You call me doctor. It's okay. It's all right. You can call me doctor. All right. Thank you, Jennifer, so much. This has been a blast.
Thank you so much, Dorothy. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening to the final Season 2 episode of Fostering Parenthood. Our team is taking a pause from producing new episodes as we figure out what shape this podcast will take in the future. While we're away, please don't hesitate to re-listen to some of your favorite Season 1 and 2 episodes and reach out to us with any questions or comments at fosterreprohealth.org. We thank you for your support. With gratitude, the Fostering Parenthood team.